I recently did a video on ditching OneNote, but I didn't talk for very long about what I switched to, which is Obsidian. Obsidian is marketed as a writing app. It's essentially just a note-taking tool. It's free for personal use and it's based on Markdown. For those who don't know what Markdown is, it's a way of inputting your formatting directly into the text itself. So for example, if I want to turn this into a header, I add the header character, which is a £, and the text got bigger. If I want to undo that, the formatting is right there and I can delete it. So I can use this to italicize a word with asterisks around it, or make lists or bold text or something like that. You might think, well, now I need to memorize a bunch of symbols, right, for my formatting. And you should probably do that, but you don't have to. You can still use what you're used to, which is menu items or hotkeys, and you can italicize or bold words that way. So that's what Markdown is, but why would I want to use it? And I wrote a lot of benefits in this note, and you can read it, you can pause the video, but I really only want to talk about one of them, which is portability. Without portability, I was on OneNote for over a decade. I had a very, very large note base. And when I decided I was frustrated with it and wanted to switch, there was no export to Markdown tool that OneNote had. Microsoft doesn't support that. And so Obsidian seemingly supports import from OneNote, but it was broken, at least for my notes. So I needed to rely on third-party tools, help from my community. It took a lot of time. It was very frustrating. And even after all of that, I didn't produce perfect notes. There were still some breakages. So by being in Markdown, even though there are different flavors of Markdown that I might want to switch to, there are automated tools that exist for converting between those flavors. So if 2 or 5 years from now I decide I don't like Obsidian anymore, I can switch from it and I won't be locked into this as a vendor anymore. So that's what Markdown is and why, but what made me choose Obsidian? Well, scientists have theorized that there are more note-taking apps than there are atoms in the universe at this point. So I knew right off the bat that I wanted Markdown, and that cut out, half the programs that are out there. After that, I did not do a deep dive and I didn't spend a week on each of these programs, but I wrote down some quick thoughts. You can again pause the video and read them if you want to. And what impressed me the most was Obsidian. So what is it about it that impressed me? Well, I want to cover some of those features. One of them is live preview mode. Right now, we can see the 2 pound signs that make up this header, but only on this line. And we know this is a header and there must be pound signs there, but we're not seeing them. That's because the cursor isn't there. If we moved it or if we selected both lines, we would see them. This is really nice because Markdown tends to inflate your text by having those formatting characters. So for example, this link down here, if I hover over it, we see what the URL is. But most of the time that doesn't matter. Just this is a link is what matters, and we can click that if we want to. So I find this much easier than bouncing between an edit and a preview mode because you don't need to keep toggling something and you don't need 2 windows open side by side. It's just easier to manage. Obsidian stores all of your files as just files on your file system. It's not in a proprietary database. It's not somewhere in the cloud. It's not opaque to you. So you can do anything you could do with files on your file system. You could open them in another editor. You could use tools to search through all of your files that you have. You could move them to a different computer. You can publish them with a different render if you want. I'll talk about the syncing and publishing a little later in this video. I want to cover some kind of quick demos about other benefits about Obsidian here. One of them is an outline that's just built in. If I click the sidebar here, we have this outline available to us. This was automatically created. It's not like I needed to type in files or folders or add items here. Just by making a header, this showed up over here. There's a command palette, which is really useful for when you want to do something, but you don't know how. So for example, if I want to strike through this text, I can press Command P and I can do toggle strike through, and it just did it. It's also useful for finding commands you don't even know exist. So for example, can I export to any file formats? Oh, look, there's export to PDF. There's a quick switcher, which I use all the time for navigating between my notes. If I want to go to my notes on Obsidian itself, I can just open the quick switcher, press enter, and I'm on that note now. And then I can use the history feature and go back. It's very fast, that's self-explanatory. Pasting an image, you saw there are images here, and yet Markdown is about putting formatting into text. So how does this work? Well, if I take another picture, you'll see. So I'll take a picture here, and now I'm just going to press paste on my keyboard. And it did a couple of things. One, if I right click and go down to reveal in Finder, we see there's now an image file on disk. So it's just another file on disk like everything else. And 2 is it added the Markdown for linking in this image here. There are a couple nice things about this. One is that by having the images be separate, they're not inflating your notes. So you won't have 10 megabyte notes anymore. And 2 is that you could link to those images from anywhere and it's just gonna be one file on your disk in the end. Linking between notes is very easy. You just use square brackets. So if I do 2 open square brackets here, I'm now in link mode essentially. And I can type something like Obsidian and press enter. And there is a link to the note that I just showed earlier. I can navigate to it, I can navigate back. There are page aliases, which I find very helpful. This note is called part 2B because it's just part of this video and I don't plan on ever saving it. But if you go to the top of any note and type 3 hyphens, when I get to the 3rd hyphen here, it's gonna add a properties widget. And the first thing that shows up is aliases. So we could call this something like cool video. And now when I open up the quick switcher, part 2B will still search for this note, but so will cool video. And so we can navigate to our notes more easily that way. And the last thing I want to talk about is that it's customizable. There are the obvious things like hotkeys and themes, but then there are also plugins for any functionality that doesn't exist out of the box. That is a benefit for most people. I sort of see it as a little bit of a drawback because it means that Obsidian isn't as incentivized to want to include that functionality themselves, knowing that the community might add it. And the reason why I think that's a bit of a drawback is because of their security model. They say, if you're working with sensitive data and wish to install a community plugin, we recommend that you perform an independent security audit before using it. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've got sensitive data and you perform a security audit on something, that means that you've got to spend the time doing that. You've got to have enough knowledge about different kinds of attacks or ways that people could exfiltrate your data. And then you've got to essentially lock yourself to that version, or you need to keep doing more audits later. And it's not just about your notes. It's not like that's the only thing that they can take from you. They can access files on your computer. They can connect to the internet. They can install additional programs. You can imagine something like a Bitcoin miner or something that tries to just take all the photos off your file system. So I'm not trying to spread fear here. I'm just saying this is possible. And because of that, I don't trust plugins. And so I'm not going to use them. But it is a benefit if you trust them or you write one for yourself. I want to talk about my setup for a little bit. The way that Obsidian monetizes itself is with commercial use. So if you're using this for personal use, it's totally free. You don't have to pay for it. And then they have two add-ons. They have sync and publish. And they do what you might expect. Sync will sync your files between computers, and publish will publish them to a website where other people could go look at your notes. For me, I didn't want to pay for these things because I plan on taking notes for the rest of my life, and paying something like $200 to $250 a year for the rest of my life just did not sound that amenable to me. So I came up with free ways of doing all of these same things. I use SyncThing for syncing. I use Starlight for publishing. I host that on Vercel. If you want to take a look at my notes, you can go to notes.adamlearns.com. This is live right now. And then I use Git and GitHub for version control, and all of this is free. So let's dive into syncing. For one, this is not a tutorial. I'm not teaching you how to set up SyncThing. This is what's going to sync things between all of your devices that you have. And I happen to use Obsidian from 3 devices. I use it on my phone, I use it on my laptop, and I use it on this computer that I'm making this video on. So this is the view of SyncThing on this computer. I'm only syncing one folder, it's just my Obsidian vaults, because I don't use this program for anything else yet. And this is the Mac that I'm on. And then I have my laptop here and I have my phone. So some downsides to SyncThing as a solution for syncing is that it only syncs when 2 devices are on. So there's actually a 4th device I didn't mention here, which is the mini PC. This is something I leave on 24/7. So let's say all of my other devices are off. I can turn on my phone and it'll still sync to something. So all of my up-to-date notes should be on the mini PC, and then they can go to whatever device happens to be on at the time. You can get conflicts doing this, although with really any sync solution, you can get conflicts because you might have concurrent editing. So it's just something to be mindful of if you're going to use this. It won't work for iOS, so you'll need to go to the store and buy an Android phone or figure out some other syncing solution. I don't know what's out there because I don't happen to have an iPhone, so this just wasn't a need for me. And it's another thing that needs to run on each device, which isn't usually a big deal, but for a phone, it does mean more battery usage. And on Android, there might be a notification in the notification bar. Maybe you're using data when you don't want to use data, so you'll need to configure that. So that's syncing. So that's what gets around one of the payments. And then the other payment is for publishing. Again, this is not a tutorial. I'm going to skip over the technical stuff. This is all free. That site that I mentioned, notes.adamlearns.com, is live. It works on mobile. It's got a search bar. It's got an index. It's got an outline, and everything works like you might expect. And this is all pretty easy to set up. So I'm going to link my notes in the description of this video. You can find what I wrote about Starlight and find the instructions I used to set this up. Some other thoughts. Obsidian is just opening vaults, which are files and folders on your machine. You can only have one vault open per Obsidian window, which is very different from what I was used to with OneNote. OneNote had sections and notebooks, and you could have any number of notebooks open in sort of arbitrarily chosen notebooks. They didn't need to follow a file structure on your machine. So what I set up for Obsidian is a notes folder, and then underneath that, a public set of notes and a private set of notes. And so when I'm making a video like this, I have just the public notes open on the side. When I'm doing anything else, I have the notes folder open, so I have all of them open. If you are okay installing plugins, there are ways to get around this, but this is at least the usage I have, and it's something that was a little different for me and harder to figure out. So I'm probably going to stick to this structure until I find out that it doesn't work for me anymore. Then I might look into something else. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there is no password protection by default. Again, we're just talking about files on your machine. So you would need to provide your own encryption or password protection. And for that reason, as shameful as it is to say this, I am still using OneNote for the very, very private notes, like my health history. So it has built-in password protection and encryption, and it runs on my phone and has that same password protection there. So I'm still using it for that. So I know I just kind of blitzed through this entire video. I was trying to do it all in one take. I don't really have too much to say at the end of this. Migrating was really, really frustrating. So now that I'm on Obsidian, I plan to use it for years. I recommend trying it out. It's free to use. If you don't migrate any of your notes to it, you can just get started immediately and you can see if you like it. And then from there, you can start to evaluate what options you want for syncing or publishing or migrating your old notes. So thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something from it, and see you next time.